Upon climbing to look through the window, he said he witnessed a procession of knights and ladies traipsing down the aisle, all led by a headless Anne Boleyn.
Hi everyone, it's Margot here with your Halloween episode of Crown and Kingdom. The Tower of London has struck awe and terror into its countless visitors throughout the centuries. Today, most people come as tourists and leave as they please. But in years gone by, many people were brought here against their will to face imprisonment, torture, and in some cases, their gruesome ends. Those people came to the Tower of London, but never left, and some say they're still there to this very day. I'm Margot Moore, and today on Crown and Kingdom, I'm going to tell you the ghost stories of His Majesty's fortress, the Tower of London. Do you believe in ghosts? I go back and forth, but some of the stories you're going to hear today have given me some real pause for thought, so let me know what you think in the comments below.
The Tower of London is not, in fact, a tower, but a series of towers, turrets, walls, and buildings that formulate a fascinating complex. You can expect a detailed virtual tour of the entire fortress on my channel, coming soon. But, for now, we're going to visit the most haunted locations within the Tower of London and hear the tales of the historic haunts within, starting with the Bloody Tower. With a name like the Bloody Tower, it should come as no surprise that this part of the Tower of London is said to be haunted by two spirits. The ghosts seen here are those of two young boys, thought to be the legendary princes in the tower. Edward V and his younger brother, the Duke of York, were the sons of King Edward IV. Upon the king's death in April of 1483, his brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, became Lord Protector of the realm on behalf of the 12-year-old new king, Edward V. But just 2 months after his brother's death, Richard had his two nephews declared illegitimate and had himself crowned king on the 26th of June, 1483. He then moved his young wards into the Tower of London, ostensibly for their protection, where they were kept in what is now known as the Bloody Tower, under heavy armed guard. At first, the boys could be seen by the public and workers at the tower, wandering the fortress, but as the summer grew on, they were spotted less and less, until the autumn of 1483, when they disappeared completely, never to be seen again. As for what truly happened to Edward V and his brother Richard, well, that's somewhat of a mystery, and a topic for another video in the future. Nowadays, in the chambers within the Bloody Tower, the twin spectral forms of these whimpering young boys have been repeatedly seen clinging to one another in terror. Such a heartbreaking sight has led many people to attempt to approach the figures, hoping to console them. However, any time a witness has come close to the boys, they both slowly back away and fade into the nearest wall. It would seem that their spectral forms are not confined to this tower either. The beefeaters that work at the Tower of London live here also, and 2 of them have had encounters that may be related to the princes in the tower. Firstly, one of the soldiers reported that his children's toys are routinely moved throughout the bedroom, even when nobody is home. But to me, the most chilling story is that of one beefeater who detailed how he was home at his apartment within the walls and heard his son, an only child, talking away in his bedroom. The soldier went in to find him playing by himself. When he asked his son who he had been speaking to, his son said, "Just the boys." And that anecdote is the best birth control I've ever been on. The boys are also said to have been captured in 2 photographs taken at the tower. The first was taken by Christine Hamlet, a rescue medium, in 2015. She believes the photo depicts one of the lost princes, as she said she was trying to communicate with him psychically during her visit to the tower. The second, taken by Mary Ryan in 2017, was supposed to just be a picture of her daughter in the White Tower, but on coming home, she discovered the face of what could be a young boy. She maintains the space behind her daughter wasn't big enough for anybody to stand, and also that there was nobody there at the time she took the photo. What do you all think? Let me know in the comments. Near the Bloody Tower is the King's house, with the guard outside on the left. This is the home of the resident governor of the tower, his family, and a restless spirit. Lady Arbella Stuart was a descendant of Margaret Tudor, older sister to King Henry VIII, and was once considered a top contender to inherit the crown of Queen Elizabeth I, before it ultimately went to their cousin, King James VI. Her secret marriage to William, 2nd Duke of Somerset, descended from Mary Tudor, the younger sister of King Henry VIII, was seen as a great insult to the crown, and King James was convinced it was part of a plot to seize his throne. Arbella was arrested and locked away in the Tower of London, where she eventually starved to death on the 25th of September, 1615. Whether her demise was the result of a self-imposed refusal to eat or a slow murder can never be known for sure. But it would seem that Arbella has not yet finished her time at the Tower of London. Major General Geoffrey Field, the resident governor of the Tower from 1994 to 2006, went on record to describe his wife's experience in the Lennox Room, one of the many rooms within the king's house. He said, quote, "Soon after we arrived in 1994, my wife Janice was making up the bed in the Lennox Room when she felt a violent push in her back, which propelled her right out of the room. On speaking to colleagues, he was informed that many people had experiences in that room, and that the ghost was thought to be that of Arbella Stuart. Reportedly, several women who slept in that room experienced the feeling of being strangled in the night, so Major Field and his wife declared that room was to be off limits to their female guests." The Martin Tower is host to one of the more curious hauntings in this video, and has long been said to be home to paranormal activity. In fact, the Hereford Journal in 1789 reported that it had, quote, "long been disturbed with noises and spectres in various fearful shapes." In the early 19th century, the unexpectedly handsome, seriously, does anybody have a time machine? Edmund Lenthal Swift was working and living at the Tower of London as the keeper of the crown jewels. One evening, Edmund had a shocking and unexplainable encounter here in the Martin Tower. His report is a first-hand account, and the strange details have often been repeated throughout the years. On a dark night in October of 1816, Edmund sat down to dinner with his family. He had just poured his wife a glass of wine when she suddenly looked up and exclaimed, "Good God! What is that?" Edward raised his eyes and saw what he described as a, quote, "cylindrical figure, like a glass tube, seemingly about the thickness of my arm, and hovering between the ceiling and the table. He claimed within it was a, quote, "dense fluid, white and pale azure, like the gathering of a summer cloud incessantly rolling and mingling within the cylinder. Edmund said it hovered for about 2 minutes before slowly beginning to move along the length of their dinner table. Then it hovered over his wife's right shoulder. As it moved behind her, she cried out, "Oh, Christ, it has seized me!" Her terror spurred Edmund into action, and he leapt to his feet before throwing his chair as hard as he could at the apparition. The chair passed straight through and smashed into the wainscot behind his wife, and the spectre sunk into the wall and disappeared. The frightened Edmund ran upstairs to his children's room and told their terrified nanny what he had just witnessed. What Edmund did not yet know is that when the apparition left his dining room, it travelled down the steps and out of the Martin Tower, where it was seen by another Tower resident. Having heard the commotion from the Martin Tower, a night guard had gone to investigate. As he approached the tower entrance, he was met by a, quote, dreadful figure that had issued from the doorway, which he took at first for an escaped bear on its hind legs. As the demon passed him, he reportedly saw a human face, described as having, quote, the expression of a demon. He thrust his bayonet at the figure and then collapsed, senseless, and was carried by his colleagues to the guard-room. Edmund visited the guard the following day and found him, quote, prostrated with terror. The guard died, some said of fright, 2 days later. And this incident was not without precedent. In 1782, a guard posted at the Martin Tower claimed he was attacked by a, quote, spirit in the likeness of a furious beast, which paralyzed him with terror, rooting him to the spot until his relief found him there at 2 o'clock in the morning. As for what these people all saw, we cannot know for certain, but I do want to point out that in the middle of the 13th century, King Henry III kept a pet polar bear here at the tower. Could the haunting be related to this bear? Or perhaps it's a sinister force that takes the figure of a beast that once walked these walls. Next comes the haunting of the Salt Tower. Built in the 1230s by King Henry III, this tower has been home to a number of prisoners throughout the centuries, but there is one who is thought to still be here. This tower is said to be haunted by the spirit of Henry Walpole, a Jesuit priest imprisoned here in 1594. He underwent severe torture within the tower complex, as the authorities attempted to force him to name his Catholic associates. Henry faced agonizing time spent on the rack and was suspended by his wrists and left to dangle for hours. His torture was strategically spaced out over 14 sessions to ensure he didn't die under his interrogation before his jailers were done with him. It's said that during the hours in which he was left here in the Salt Tower to recover after his sessions of torture, he would pray to the saints to give him courage and used his damaged hands to carve into the walls of his prison. You can see one of his carvings, his own name, clearly here in this image. It's reported that at quiet times the low murmuring of what could be a prayer is heard by those standing in this tower, even when they're alone. Visitors have complained of what feels like cold fingers on the back of their necks, and night watchmen report a mysterious yellow glow emanating from the windows of the empty tower after dark. It gets brighter and brighter before eventually blinking out leaving the empty tower in darkness once again. Nearby is the Wakefield Tower, where popular legend states that King Henry VI met his brutal end. Deposed for a second time during the Wars of the Roses in 1471, Henry was imprisoned in the Tower of London by rival King Edward IV. Official records at the time stated that Henry died of, quote, melancholia on the 21st of May, 1471, heartbroken over the recent death of his son. But the general assumption then, as is now, is that he was murdered on the orders of Edward IV, who had himself crowned king the day after his predecessor's death. Tradition holds that Henry was murdered while praying here in the Wakefield Tower, either bludgeoned or stabbed to death. Regardless of how it happened, Henry did meet his end here at the tower, and it is said that on the anniversary of his death, his, quote, pale and mournful spectre appears and restlessly paces around the room until the last stroke of the midnight bell tolls, whence he fades from view, seemingly at rest for another year. The oldest part of the castle complex, the White Tower, is today home to a branch of the royal armories. But among this collection of weaponry and beautiful, if slightly eerie, coats of armor, a pale wraith is said to reside. She was first seen by a group of schoolchildren who reported seeing a pale woman in a white dress waving to them from a window near the top of the tower, where the public cannot access. Since then, she has been spotted drifting silently around the rooms of the White Tower, most frequently in St. John's Chapel, located inside. It is said that the scent of women's perfume often floats on an unseen breeze near the chapel, and some believe the smell is connected to the White Lady, referred to as Maud by some tower employees. A former worker mentioned that she never saw Maud, but would always say hello when she was working alone in the White Tower, just in case. The White Lady seems relatively harmless, but there is another, more nefarious presence in this part of the building. A night guard reported the sensation of somebody throwing a cloak over him as he walked through the tower. His vision went dark, and he tried to free himself, only to feel the sensation of the cloth being seized from behind and tightened around his throat. After a few horrifying seconds, the sensation abruptly stopped, but he said there were marks visible around his neck the following day. Another night guard, Arthur Crick, recorded his experience in the White Tower. He said he was making his rounds and paused to sit on a ledge to relace his shoe. He had just slipped off his right shoe when a voice behind him whispered, "There's only you and I here." In an impressive display of nerve and humor, Arthur responded, "Just let me get this bloody shoe on, and there'll be only you." The tales of execution within the walls of the Tower of London are well known, and a number of those who faced the axe here are said to still reside at the site of their demise. Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, was a niece of both Kings Edward IV and Richard III. Her son, Reginald Pole, the last Catholic Archbishop of Canterbury, actively spoke out against King Henry VIII and openly refuted the king's self-appointed position as the head of the Church of England. Reginald was safely ensconced on the continent while rallying against the king, and, unable to reach him, Henry took his vengeance out on his family, sentencing his 67-year-old mother, Margaret, to execution. Condemned to be beheaded, Margaret's execution here did not go as planned. The Tower's primary executioner was away, dealing with rebellion in the north of the country, and his post was taken up by his junior assistant, described by an eyewitness as, quote, a wretched and blundering youth. Said youth, quote, hacked her head and shoulders to pieces in the most pitiful manner. The first blow missed her neck entirely and cleaved into her shoulder, and it would take 11 strokes total to finally sever her head from her body. Talk about a bad first day on the job. Reportedly, Margaret's last moments have been repeatedly played out here on the anniversary of her gruesome death, with her spectre both seen and heard as her ghostly screams echo off the walls over the tower. Lady Jane Grey, famously referred to as the 9-Day Queen, entered the Tower of London as a ruler, but shortly thereafter became a prisoner. Deposed by her cousin, Queen Mary I, Jane was kept prisoner at the Tower, in the buildings here with the green doors. She languished here for months before finally being sentenced to death. On the 12th of February, 1554, Jane watched as her sobbing husband was escorted out of the Tower for his own public execution, and she then witnessed the return of his corpse shortly after, with head freshly removed. Mere minutes after that, she was taken from her own chambers and brought down to the scaffold near here within the Tower complex. She was beheaded with a single blow. But, as with Margaret Pole, Jane's spirit is said to appear on the anniversary of her execution. Jane is always seen as a white, shimmering figure, sadly strolling either along the green or silently gliding along the battlements before slowly withering away. Perhaps the most famous prisoner in the Tower's nearly 1,000 years of history is Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII. Anne fell from favor just 3 years after her wedding, largely owing to her inability to provide the king with a son. In order to clear the way for Henry to marry his third wife, Anne was arrested and sentenced to death on trumped-up charges of treason. She spent the last weeks of her life imprisoned here, and would face her execution on the 19th of May, 1536. But it would seem she is not at rest. Reported sightings of her spirit date back to the 1800s, and she's been seen by both visitors and Tower residents alike, most often near the chapel here, where she was hastily buried after her beheading. The most famous sighting of Anne's ghost comes from 1864. Captain J.D. Dundas was glancing out of his window when he spotted a soldier below, on Tower Green, acting strangely. Dundas said the man appeared to be challenging someone, which he then spotted for himself, describing it as a, quote, whitish, female figure sliding towards the soldier. The soldier charged the figure with his bayonet, which went straight through, and then collapsed unconscious. Fainting while on duty is a serious offense, and the guard was actually court-martialed for his behavior. However, he was saved from prison time after Captain Dundas and another guard Both testified that they had seen the same apparition. On another occasion, a soldier reported that he saw a light burning in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. He went to investigate, and, upon climbing to look through the window, he said he witnessed a procession of knights and ladies traipsing down the aisle, all led by a headless Anne Boleyn. It is also said that quiet weeping can be heard from inside the chapel at times when it is known to be empty. Whether this is Anne Boleyn or perhaps another sad figure who may be buried here, however, can't be said for certain. And there are countless stories of other specters wandering within these walls. An early morning sentry claimed he saw a woman in Tudor dress approach him from the mist rolling off the Thames, who then faded into vapor. Employees who reported seeing pairs of shoes in the women's staff bathroom, only to find the stalls empty once the doors are opened. The daughter of a beefeater who saw a black figure in her room right before her TV turned on with static at 3 a.m. Or the time I was in a duty flat on Mint Street and watched a heavy fire door unlatch itself and slam shut, while I was the only one home. Not to mention the unexplained thumps and whispers, disembodied footsteps and flickering lights, motion sensors going off when nobody is present, and the feeling that many visitors and residents report of an uncanny sensation that somebody is watching them. At the Tower of London, it would seem you're never truly alone.
Well, I'm going to go turn on every light in my house now. Thank you to Edmund Swift for my newest historical crush, to the countless undead who I sincerely hope do not mind being a part of this video, and of course to you for watching. This has been Crown and Kingdom. If you're interested in a fully detailed virtual tour of the Tower of London, make sure to hit the subscribe button because I'll be releasing one later this year. But for now, I'm Margot Moore, wishing you goodbye and good times. Do you believe in ghosts? I go back and forth, but some of these stories have... It's haunted, so what can you do?